Hello, this is Vicki Tayton, and I am here today to do a video recording of Lecture 1 Basic Shapes in Adobe Illustrator CC. You'll find the printed version of this lecture in the Week 2 module, and I do highly recommend reading through that and also watching the videos on LinkedIn Learning before you start this week's project and assignment. But to get started, Adobe Illustrator has some very useful tools to make basic geometric shapes. And the imagery within more complex graphics like logos, icons, and more stylized images often just consist of a combination of basic shapes. Illustrator has several basic shapes that you can use to build more complex shapes. And the basic shapes can be found over here in your toolbar. And if you don't see all of them, you'll click that little downward facing arrow where you'll then see that there is a rectangle tool, a rounded rectangle, an ellipse tool, a polygon tool, a star tool, and a flare tool. These tools are nested underneath the rectangle tool, and whenever you see that tiny little arrow in the bottom right of the toolbox, that will indicate that there are more tools nested underneath. So all you do is just hold your mouse down on that tiny little arrow and a little pop-up menu will appear. You can peel the shape tools off the toolbox into their own mini palette if you like by just clicking and dragging this whole palette. Oops, let me try that again. I couldn't get a hold of it. Oops. Off to the side like that. So there are several ways to create a shape with a specific tool. One is to select a tool and then click and drag down and to the right on the page. The top left of the shape is determined by where you started to drag. If you want to create a polygon or a star, while creating the shape and holding down the mouse, you can use the up and down arrows on your keyboard to add or subtract polygon sides or star points. If you want to maintain the aspect ratio of the rectangle, the rounded corner rectangle, or ellipse, you can hold down the Shift key while you're dragging. And the Shift key will also constrain a star's point or a polygon's side to remain at the top. So you can use multiple keyboard modifiers. If you want to draw out from the center, just hold down the Alt key on Windows or the Option key on a Mac, and this will allow you to draw from the center. I can also, if I can reach it, can't quite reach. I was going to increase my points. You can do several things at one time. If you wish to maintain the aspect ratio to create circles and squares, you'll hold down the Alt key to start from the middle and the Shift key at the same time. And that'll keep your ratios the same and allow you to draw from the center. Polygons are always drawn from the center. And if you hold down the Alt or Option key, let's see, let me just increase the... If you hold down the Alt or Option key while drawing a star, it modifies the positioning of the inner corners. To draw a shape by entering numeric values, you can hold down the Alt key on Windows or the Option key on a Mac and just click once. You don't drag. A dialog box will open and then you can enter in all of the relevant information here. So let's just try this. You can change the number of points and then that would create a star with those values. And then holding down the space bar while you are creating a shape allows you to move the shape while you draw it. Okay. Now I just want to clear off my artboard here and start with the line tools. I'm going to go ahead and redock this. There are several basic line paths that you can use to help build simple images. The line tools consist, and you'll see there's another small little menu underneath the line segment tool. So we have the line segment, an arc, a spiral, a rectangular grid, and a polar grid. There are also certain ways to, or several ways to create a line path. So you can select the tool that you want to work with and click and drag the path. The position where you begin to drag defines where the path begins, and it ends when you release the mouse. Holding down the Shift key has different effects depending on the tool selected. If you have the line segment tool selected, the Shift key will constrain this line segment to vertical, horizontal, or 45 degrees. So I can't draw anything but those three. If you're using the arc tool, the Shift key will constrain the aspect ratio of the arc, creating 1/4 of a circle. If you're using the spiral key, the spiral tool, sorry, the Shift key will constrain the outer points of the spiral to 0, 45 degrees, 90 degrees, 135 degrees, 180 degrees, 225 degrees, and 315 degrees. If you're using the rectangular grid tool, the Shift key will constrain the ratio, making it a square. Oops, sorry, holding down the caps lock instead. And then with the polar grid, the Shift key will constrain the aspect ratio, making it a circle. If you want to draw out from the center with any of these, you also use the Alt key on Windows or the Option key on Mac. And if you wish to, so let's choose the spiral tool. I'll start from the center and draw out. I can also hold the Shift key, and that will constrain it like as it would if I was just using the Shift key. Spirals are actually always drawn from the center, so that wasn't a great tool to start with. So let's just try the rectangular grid. I'll start drawing that out. I'm going to work from the center, but now I'm going to hold down the Shift key, and so it constrains it to a perfect square going from the center. And if you want to draw a line path using a numeric value, you just hold down the Alt key on Windows or the Option key on a Mac, click once, and don't drag, and you'll get a dialog box where you can enter the relevant information. If I want this to be 3 inches, and I want the angle to be 33 degrees, then I would say OK, and there it would be. And then holding down the space bar while you're drawing a shape enables you to move that shape around your artboard while you're drawing it. And I simply release it to draw it out, and then hit the space bar again to move it. Once drawn, shapes and lines can be modified in many ways, and they can easily also be duplicated. So in order to modify a shape, you have to select a shape. Let me go ahead and draw out a shape. You won't be able to see this unless I give it a fill, so I'm going to give it a bright green fill, or bright pink. It also has a stroke. I'm just going to draw out a big square. All right, if you want to modify a shape, you have to select it, and in order to select it, you're going to click on it using the selection tool, which is the solid arrow tool at the top left of the toolbox. If you have multiple objects on your artboard, you can also use the selection tool and drag around all of them to select all of them. Or conversely, you can select the first object and then use the Shift key and then click on subsequent objects. Once an object is selected, the paths become highlighted with a color, and it's usually blue for a new document. There's also a highlighted rectangle that surrounds the selected object. This is called the bounding box. And if you don't see the bounding box, you can go up to View, Show. Here we go. And I'm actually seeing the bounding box, so I would say Show. If I hide this and then I do it again, I can click Show Bounding Box. So there's my bounding box. The hollow squares around the bounding box are handles that allow you to modify the object in several ways. By dragging on a handle, you can resize it. Normally, you want to constrain your ratio when you resize it, so you want to hold down the Shift key when you're resizing. And the handles in the center of the sides will resize only one aspect of that object. So dragging on the middle handle of the top or bottom just resizes it vertically, and then dragging on the middle handle on either side will resize it horizontally. It's also very easy to rotate an object with the bounding box. So place your cursor just outside of a corner handle, as shown. The cursor will change into a curved double arrow, which indicates that it's ready to rotate. Now drag around the shape to rotate it. And if you want to constrain your rotation to vertical, horizontal, or 45 degrees, just hold down the Shift key as you drag. You can also use the transform palette, and we'll talk more about that later, but that will, you can enter in values to change the, you can go ahead and look at that up here. You can just enter in values here. I could just tell it how large I want this to be and where I want my y-axis and my x-axis, and then my angles. So I can use that. Okay, duplicating. Objects can be duplicated in several ways. We're going to learn two methods right now. You can go ahead and copy, a selected object or a set of objects and then paste them. Or you can use your keyboard shortcut, which is Control C or Command C, and then Control V or Command V to copy and paste. But you can also just hold down the Alt key or the Option key while you drag a selected object, and that will create a duplicate from the selected object. The art that Illustrator creates consists simply of paths, and it's all known as vector art. There aren't individual pixels like you would have seen had you been working with Photoshop, but everything in Illustrator is mathematically created. The color in vector artwork is created by filling color within a path and or applying a stroke to the path itself. So towards the bottom of the toolbox, you'll see the fill and the stroke colors. If you want to change the color of a shape, the fill color, you need to select it first. And then you need to ensure that the fill color box is in front of the stroke color box. You can see that you can swap these out. So we want to make sure that the fill color is in the front. And then within the color palette, which you can get to by just double clicking on the fill color, you can do a number of things. You can find a color by using the color picker, getting to a general color. You can go use your color swatches. Let's see. You can use web only colors. You can also, let me cancel that, go over to your color, your swatches. Here's your color guide. So there's all kinds of numbers number of ways that you can use to change the fill color on that particular shape. Now, if you don't want to fill for some reason, the white square with the red line through it will remove all fill. And you can do the same thing with a stroke. So you bring the stroke to the front. Oops. Actually, you want to go ahead and click on the stroke color box up here in the toolbox, and we can adjust the color of the stroke. We can also change the size of the stroke up here. Next week you're going to learn a lot more about painting with fills and strokes, but this gives you the basics for this week. So the Pathfinder palette can be used to combine basic shapes into more complex shapes. Let me go ahead and select everything here and clear this. All I'm doing is selecting all of those shapes and deleting them. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. If you look over here, you have a color palette, you have the properties, you have color guide, you have stroke, you have gradient, you have transparency, libraries, appearance, graphic styles, layers, and artboards. If you can't find something like a particular palette, you can just, you can go up to the window, and you can find, you can bring up the palette that you want. So if we go to Pathfinder here, that'll pop up the Pathfinder palette. So on the Pathfinder palette, you see the different shape modes. You can add or unite, you can subtract or minus front. These are shape modes. You can intersect, and you can exclude. So we'll go ahead and see how all those work. So if I just draw out a rectangle and a star, and then I'm going to go ahead and select both of these, I can combine those using the Add button or Unite, and that combines the two shapes into a single shape. So the fill and the stroke will remain the same. And if I click off there and then click on, you see that everything now is going to work as one shape. Let me just move this to the side and draw another couple shapes. Draw the same. I'm going to go ahead and draw pull this out again. There we go. So I can quickly move through. Okay, if I have two shapes and I want to subtract the topmost shape, which and will also remove the bottom part of the bottom shape in the areas where they overlapped. So I again would select both of these and then choose the subtract, and that gives me the same fill and stroke, but there's a cutout instead of the two shapes being combined. Then if we do this again, here's a rectangle and a star. Now intersecting will retain the area where both objects overlap. Let me move this just a little bit. I want to make it similar to your book. So again, I'll select both of them and I will intersect, and it'll eliminate everything but where the two objects overlapped. So you can create some different shapes that way. And then exclude. We'll cut a hole where the two objects overlap and retain everything else. Oops, I didn't select anything, so don't forget you have to select them. And so that will give me a hole in between. And again, the fill and the stroke remain the same. Now, the second row are the pathfinders. So in the pathfinders, we have divide, trim, merge, crop, outline, and minus back. Let me go ahead and clear my palette here, my artboard. Oops. We can take a look at those. Oops, there we go. So let's see, dividing, draw my two shapes. Dividing uses the intersecting paths to cut each of the areas into separate pieces. After dividing, the pieces are automatically grouped. So let's go ahead and select all this, and then we're going to divide. So now if I click off, they're all grouped together, but I can also ungroup them, and then I could click on each of those separate objects and pull those apart if I wanted to. Now trimming removes only the bottom shape where the two shapes overlap. So if I select all of this and then trim it, and then pull the two shapes apart, oops, oh, I have to ungroup them. You can see that a little area was removed in the rectangle. Now when you trim, the stroke attributes are no longer retained. So you can see that I still have my fill, but I don't have the stroke. Now merging is similar to adding. I'm going to put back my stroke in both these so you can kind of see. Yeah, got 2-point stroke. There we go. Merging is similar to add in that both shapes are going to be combined into a single shape. So this is merge. However, stroke attributes are not retained. Let's see. Now, cropping, oops, and again I lost my stroke, so let me just go ahead and add that back in. I think it's just easier for you to see. Okay, let's select both. And now if I crop it, it's going to divide the artwork into the component filled faces and then delete all the parts of the artwork that fall outside the boundary of the topmost object. It's also going to remove any strokes. If you want to use outline, that is going to divide an object into its component line segments or edges. And it removes, this is helpful. This is useful if you're preparing artwork that needs a trap for overprinting. And then the last one, minus back. Let me just get rid of this. Draw my two rectangles again. Oops. All right, and minus back is similar to subtract, except that the bottom shape is eliminated, and it removes the area of the top shape where they overlapped. And it does retain the fill and the stroke. So you might think about how you could use these shape combination tools to create more complex shapes from the simple shapes that Illustrator has provided for you. Next week we'll continue on, but I hope this lecture has been helpful for you.